Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices is made possible in part by Allstate and CIBC.
Good evening y bienvenidos to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. I'm Marisa Parra, reporter with CBS 2 Chicago. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, another police shooting has left the city examining police use of force. We talked to a diverse cast of community members about their reaction and the road ahead. As vaccines become more available in the U.S. and people look to traveling abroad, how Americans can be mindful about the communities they're visiting. And a team of researchers look for clues in historic paintings at a museum in Pilsen. First tonight, we want to start with that newly released video from the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. Body camera footage showing the fatal shooting of Anthony Alvarez by Chicago police on March 31st. The video appears to show Alvarez holding a gun as he runs from an officer in Portage Park, where the officer orders Alvarez to drop the gun before shooting him in the back. The aftermath has left his family and many in the community once again questioning police use of force tactics when chasing a suspect on foot. Joining us to discuss this at length are Jacob Daneman, a communications director for the independent political organization United Northwest Side, Jessica Estrada, a coordinator for the Communities United Survivors Alliance for Healing and Justice, and Waldemar Cruz, a retired Cicero police sergeant and president of the Puerto Rican Police Association. Now, before we begin our discussion, we will see video of the foot chase in the moments just before shots were fired. We should also note that COPA has not yet released details of what led the police to pursue Alvarez in the first place.
Hey, drop the gun!
Okay, we want to start with you, Waldemar Cruz. Do you see any problems with the Alvarez shooting on the part of the officer, given the fact that you are a Latino and a retired sergeant? I'm curious to hear what your initial perspective is.
This is the difficult part when we kind of quarterback a situation that an officer was involved with that leads to a fatality or just an injury to someone in the public. So because COPA has not come out with its complete finding, it is difficult, and the information that we have gotten might not be in full detail. I and our organizations don't like to comment on those types of events until we get the full details. So, until we get that, we want to let COPA do their investigation. It goes well with the family and the police officers involved.
Okay, so to your point, what would knowing what led to the chase to begin with, would that potentially make a difference in your opinion as to whether you think it's justified or not?
Yes, we don't have the information. We don't have those details. So it's hard for officers on the job or people who've been on the job to comment on something like that.
Okay. Well, Jacob Daneman, we want to turn to you. What is your reaction to the Alvarez shooting video?
I mean, it's horrific. He's shot in the back. He's asked to comply, and he's not given a moment to comply. And I think that a lot of reactionaries to people who are demanding police reform or accountability or an oversight from police often say, oh, well, if you just complied, then you would be fine. And that's just not the case. And you saw that with the Adam Toledo shooting as well, is these people aren't given a chance to comply, and they're summarily executed, on the spot. So I don't sort of buy that if additional information is released, it would change the facts of this shooting.
Jessica Estrada, we'll turn to you now. Do you believe the shooting was justified?
That's a great question. Some of our community members feel re-traumatized and hurt, and some of our Latinx community members see policing very different. Like our first generation Latinx community members. But in our work, we need to create sustainable alternatives on what safety looks like beyond having police officers. Police officers shouldn't be allowed to shoot first and ask questions later. We really need to find alternatives to policing.
Okay, so Jessica, you're hearing from people who are very upset by this and people who perhaps don't feel like it was justified. We want to turn to you, Waldemar Cruz. We know that the Latino community is diverse and the reaction to these recent police shootings isn't one size fits all. Are you hearing from Latino Chicagoans expressing support for the police in light of what we've seen?
We always hear support for the police. We understand that some type of reform is needed. We do. We understand that there's officers that shouldn't be carrying a badge, and that's something we have to correct. But the main objective that we don't ever highlight is the gangs and the criminal activity itself. We have to find ways of making it better for our community by giving our youth and people in our community alternatives than us being involved in their lives on a daily basis that can lead to incidents like we just seen
and
right now.
And to clarify, you're hearing support from Latino Chicagoans specifically as well?
Yes, the Chicago community is, like you said, is very diverse, and they want safety. You know, we talk about the reforms that we're making. We're talking about the added technology that we're putting. We're putting shop finders in communities. We're putting pole cameras in community, body cameras. Those are things that were requested by the public because their neighborhoods were being overrun by crime. That's why those technology standpoints are out there for us to get help for the community that police cannot monitor every area at every minute.
Waldemar, thank you. Jacob Daneman, to you. Reaction to the shooting and video release of 13-year-old Adam Toledo was swift in Little Village. Can you tell us what the Northwest Side is like as far as residents and politics and how that might factor in with the reaction we're seeing with Alvarez?
Well, you know, the Northwest Side is kind of its own unique ecosystem. There's a lot of first responders on the Northwest Side. So it's kind of like a little enclave, which is another problem that I think is pervasive around the city of Chicago. Is you have these places like Beverly and Jefferson Park that are very, you know, kind of almost police enclaves, police neighborhoods, and then those people go out and they police other neighborhoods. They don't really have a connection to those communities. So it's hard to identify, you know, the Northwest Side as thinking one way versus, you know, other neighborhoods thinking another way about this shooting. We try and process this, you know, this horrific shooting, and I think everyone, you know, is upset by the loss of life. But I think that you can't say that like one community will or one neighborhood will look at it one way, because just like any other community, you know, there are diverse opinions.
Now, looking ahead, we have just a couple of minutes here. I want to make sure you all get a chance to answer. What do you think our communities and city administration need to do to prevent these shootings from happening to begin with? Daneman, we'll start with you.
I think that the number one way that we can combat this is to install a measure of police accountability. And I think the ECPS ordinance, which is the kind of the new police accountability ordinance, which is empowering communities for public safety, is one way to do that. It gives communities the opportunity to oversee those who they've entrusted to police them. So
thank you so much. I want to make sure we give everyone a chance here. One sentence for each of you. Jessica, we'll start with you.
I truly believe that people with lived experience need to be in the forefront on making decisions that impact their community and their city. And they need to be listened to, not just hear them. And Communities United is one of the organizations in a coalition enforcing for Chicago Police Consent Decree. And we have been pushing for CPD foot pursuit policies since the Consent Decree was negotiated in 2018. And we have been ignored. So we need to listen to the voices of people with lived experience and see them as experts.
Okay, and Waldemar Cruz, to your point, you know, let's talk about what do you think police departments and city administrations should be doing differently in their practices?
Well, we're doing it right now. We are making sure that we have organizations like COPA overseeing us, and we have to work harder on being proactive to eliminate the chances of our youth or our people getting caught up in criminal activity. So then we can downgrade some of this stuff, and we won't be experiencing some of these dangerous situations and losing life as we've done in the last few times here that you've shown.
Well, I want to give our thanks to Jacob Daneman, Jessica Estrada, and Waldemar Cruz. Thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Up next, how to be a thoughtful tourist. Stay with us. As we enter a new phase of the pandemic, a growing number of Americans report feeling comfortable with traveling overseas again. While the United States is a leader in the vaccine rollout, many of the places Americans want to travel to, including several Spanish-speaking ones, have much lower vaccination rates. This comes as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said people who are fully vaccinated make for low-risk international travelers, but they've also issued advisories for certain countries still grappling with the virus. Joining us to talk about travel to Latino and Spanish-speaking places and how you can be a thoughtful tourist are Janet Ceja, a California-based travel journalist and travel advisor, and Aresha Martinez Cardoso, a researcher in public health and associate professor at the University of Chicago. First of all, thank you both for joining us right now. Now, we understand there's a pandemic record. 43% of Americans say they would not feel guilty for traveling right now. This, according to data from destination analysts. About 1 in 10 people have plans in place to travel overseas. Jeanette, first off, where are Americans traveling to? And let's focus a little bit on Latin America and Spanish-speaking places.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on today. It's so exciting. Some of the places that American travelers have been going to since the pandemic really started has been Mexico. Mexico has continued to stay open and is still open to this day. However, Mexico has been very good in certain areas, for example, Cabo San Lucas, about how they've been handling capping hotel stays, capping tours, really keep in mind how tourists should wear masks as well as locals. So Mexico has definitely been a international destination that a lot of American travelers have been going to. Costa Rica is open for American tourists as well. Costa Rica does require American tourists to have a proof of medical insurance. Some other countries that are open as well are Guatemala, Colombia, El Salvador, for example. So these are some of the Latin American countries that Americans can go to at this moment.
Okay, now we're going to get back to how we can be thoughtful tourists in places like those, but we want to take a listen to Dr. Susan Lopez from Rush University Medical Center. She has some advice for those traveling to places like Mexico that she gave to her patients, and most importantly, she says make sure you wear a mask and social distance when you are on their land as new variants emerge.
It also means that there's a possibility that someone from somewhere else could bring a different strain from somewhere else to that country. So making sure that they are using those masks to protect those that they're visiting as well.
Now, Aresha, let's turn to you next. Guidance appears to give the okay to those who are fully vaccinated for travel. Does that mean that we should?
Yeah, that's a decision that I think everyone has to make on a case-by-case basis. The CDC has issued guidelines on where they suggest folks should travel and their own recommendations. My advice would be to try to pick a zone 1, 2, or 3 destination and avoid 4 or 5 zones. Of course, that means that rules out a lot of Latin America. But if you do decide to travel, I would suggest that folks aim to be fully vaccinated, waiting your 2-week waiting period time, and also get a test when you return. Continue to mask, social distance, and limit your interactions, as Dr. Lopez suggested. And again, we're going to speak on this a little bit later, but really travel mindfully, limit your itinerary, try to stay and shop local, and get comfortable with no's, right? You can't come in, we can't have you, your size of group within the restaurant. We have to limit capacity and just being mindful and adhering to the recommendations and the guidelines that are set forth by the countries that you're visiting.
And speaking of guidelines, Jeanette, what guidance are you seeing from Latin American countries that they have for travelers? For instance, quarantine or testing requirements or proof of vaccination?
Most of the countries in Latin America, for example, that are open to American tourists do require a negative COVID test proof within 72 hours to enter their country. Some countries are a little more strict than others. And for example, Mexico, you really all need to show that. But it really just depends. It's a case by case, country by country, and it's fluid. So it's ever changing. Some countries add on restrictions, some take them away. It depends on the current status of the pandemic in that country, as well as what you were talking about earlier, being mindful. I also advise travelers, if they're going to go to an international country where the vaccines aren't widely available like they are in the US, if you can go fully vaccinated, but still bring your PPE gear, your mask, your hand sanitizer, your gloves, and be mindful of the country that you're going. Do your due diligence, your research. What is the current status? What are the requirements? And like the word, I really like the word mindful. Be mindful of the locals that you're going to go visit, because they may not have the same accessibility to the vaccines like we have.
And we want to make sure we have time to get to a few more questions here. Arisha, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but is it possible that even fully vaccinated Americans can have a negative impact by visiting countries that may not be quite there yet?
Yeah, this is a good question. We do know, based on the best science that we have available, that vaccination does reduce not only your own risk of getting COVID, but transmitting COVID, but it's not 100% surefire guarantee. So that's why we want to make sure to be doing all of the social distancing and COVID guidelines to make sure that we protect others, even though we might be protected more ourselves. There's also some concerns that the current vaccines that we have now don't protect the same way against the variants that we do know of, as well as the variants that we might not be aware of yet, right? So again, making sure to mask up, social distance, all of those good things. And the last thing I'll say is we have to also be concerned about kids, right? Kids don't have access to vaccines yet, particularly the young ones. And what we also know is that while kids don't get as sick as often with COVID, there's some evidence that they are more likely to spread the vaccine, that they have more of a viral load is what we call it. And so we just have to be extra careful if we do just travel our kids, make sure. So encouraging them to do all the same things that we are, and maybe just hold off on those family vacations, because we don't want to unwittingly spread COVID through our kids without and exacerbate health inequities within the countries that we're trying to visit.
Arisha, to you now, tell us what happens if someone from the United States does get COVID-19 while they're overseas.
Yeah, good question. And we hope this doesn't happen. But if it does, first of all, communicate with your hotel to try to figure out extended travel arrangements, as well as all of your travel partners. It might be a good idea to contact the embassy to figure out if there's any sort of arrangements that they have set up for those who are traveling internationally, and really adhere to the social distancing and the quarantine guidelines. I know it's tough to be stuck in another country, but it really protects you and others if you avoid traveling yourself as well as your entire group, and making sure not to come home until you get tested and you test negative. So that's basically what I would suggest folks do.
Well, that was a thoughtful answer. We only have about a minute left here. So, Jeanette, I want to round out. Final question. I want to hear from you on this sort of double-edged sword when it comes to tourism. Despite the risks, a lot of economies do rely on travel, which, as we know, has been devastated during the pandemic. How do you reconcile that?
Yes, there are a lot of countries and locals who depend on tourism. One of the ways that you can support, even from your home or while you're planning a trip, is you can book your hotel stays for the future. And if you need to change the dates, most hotels will honor that and give you some kind of credit. So you can support local hotels as well. Tours are also doing that, where you can buy gift cards, you can do virtual tours. So even when you're in the planning stages, there's still many ways that travelers can support the locals abroad.
And our thanks to Jeanette Ceja and Arisha Martinez Cardoso. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This Wednesday is the Mexican holiday Cinco de Mayo, and despite a common misconception, it is not Mexico's Independence Day. It actually commemorates a classic underdog story in Mexico's history, an unlikely military win that had a ripple effect in American history. Scientists in Pilsen are turning their research to centuries-old paintings from colonial-era Mexico. Chicago Tonight's Mark Vitale visited the National Museum of Mexican Art for a special cocktail of art and science.
The museum has been closed to the public for more than a year, but the staff stays busy. Right now, they're assisting visiting scientists who hope to discover new information about some curious canvases.
We have the incredible privilege of being able to look into the past of some of our pieces from the collection. So we have taken them down from the permanent exhibition here at the National Museum of Mexican Art, and we've taken them across the hall into a temporary laboratory where they are being examined and they're being scrutinized to see what their true story may be.
Like this Virgin of Guadalupe, the paintings are devotional images of Christianity, most of them from the 18th century.
In Mexico, the colonial era ends technically as soon as Mexico becomes a republic. So 1810 is usually the cutoff date. Pieces that are being examined, we believe, are from the colonial era or right around there, and certainly feature ideas, concepts, beliefs from that time period.
Researchers are collecting data with a combination of hyperspectral imaging and X-ray fluorescence. The mobile lab was set up by the Center for Scientific Studies in the Arts, a collaboration between Northwestern University and the Art Institute of Chicago.
It's something that the center is really designed to do, to travel to museums and various institutions to provide technical and analytical support where there is otherwise no opportunity to do so. And today we're here midway through our campaign with the National Museum of Mexican Art, looking at 6 colonial paintings to understand a lot more about the history of art production at this time in Mexico.
They hope to find out what kind of pigments were used and whether they were European-made or indigenous.
And they've been showing us some areas that have genuine gold in them. They're finding copper in some of the greens. Also, they'll be looking for what's called pedimento, which is it's a nice, beautiful Italian word for how an artist changes their mind in the design of a piece. Like maybe they started with a certain sketch and then they painted over that.
The science team also views their museum trip as a kind of outreach project.
It is indeed a scientific study, but there is a broader scope, which is to bring science and science for art to a wider audience, which is always very nice for us scientists.
They're still in the data collecting phase. A full report will come later.
What follows from this trip is a lot of post-production, so a lot of analysis of the results, so interpretation of the results, conversations back and forth with the folks here.
This is sort of like a genealogy project of the works of art. We're going to take a look at our treasures, our cultural treasures that we have, and really see where they came from and what their history, what their past was. And of course, that will just add so much more to the stories of our community, whether it's here in Chicago or in Mexico.
For Latino Voices, this is Mark Vitale.
The work wraps up this week. We'll update the story when the findings of the report are released later this year. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight podcast and subscribe.
And that's our show for this Saturday night. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from TTW News, including a Q&A on what to do with your COVID-19 vaccination card. And join Angel Ito tomorrow night for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Public art has flourished on the streets of Chicago over the pandemic. A look at what it brings for artists and for the rest of us. And harmonica lessons with Chicago blues legend Billy Branch. And you can catch my reporting on CBS 2 Chicago. Next week on Latino Voices, Michael Puente with WBEZ will be right here in the host chair. Now, from all of us here at Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, I'm Marisa Parra. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy, stay safe, y buenas noches.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.